The night the storm hit, I should have curled up on the couch, woken by thunderclaps, and stayed inside until the deluge passed. Instead, Camille's pleading voice rattled through my skull. Please, Tyson, he's stranded, and you're the only one nearby who knows cars. Russell Carr. Her ex-husband. The man she said she barely spoke to anymore, the man who once held her heart in his calloused hands while mine sat cold on the sidelines. But when the rain fell like hammers on the roof and the streetlights flickered in the sheets of water, Camille's desperation roped me into action. I pulled on my boots, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped into the storm as though I belonged there. I found Russell cursing into the night, bent over the hood of his battered sedan at the curb, water sluicing down the grooves of his face. His anger snapped in the air each time he struck the roof of the car with an open hand. He looked like a man trying to beat the rain itself into submission. As I approached, he half turned, the beam of my flashlight catching his eyes in the glass. Didn't expect company, he growled, voice thick with frustration and something darker I couldn't name. He didn't recognize me in the stunt jacket and mud-splattered jeans, so I let him stew a moment before I cleared my throat. Let me take a look, I said, kneeling under the dripping hood. The wiring harness had gone bad. Connector corroded by water. I fished out my tools from the kit I always kept in the garage, fingers numb but steady. The thunder rolled overhead, and I wondered if the sky was judging me, daring me to keep playing hero to my wife's ex. But I set aside hesitation and worked the wires, grounding the connection with duct tape and a bit of electrical grease. With the flashlight clenched between my teeth, I reattached the battery cable and turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughing like a man waking from a coma, then roared to life. Russell straightened, chest heaving as though he'd just finished a race. He wiped rain from his forehead, and for a moment I glimpsed the man Camille once loved, confident, indefatigable, the kind of guy who never knew the meaning of giving up. He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture heavier than he intended. Didn't think you had it in you, he said, voice grudging. The headlights cut through the rain, illuminating his chipped fender and a flood of memories. I should have left him there, silent in the patter of water, a silhouette disappearing into the night. Instead, I huffed out a sigh and said, just needed a jump. He offered a nod of thanks and climbed into the driver's seat. The engine's growl filled the quiet between us until he killed it again. Look, Tyson, he said, using my first name like he owned the right to remind me of it. I appreciate it. His gratitude sat crooked on his lips, and I noticed then the set of his shoulders, the way he braced as if expecting another storm. Be careful out here, I replied, eyes on the road that sloshed away into the dark. Camille's words echoed in my head, but I held my tongue. Something about Russell that night felt off, like the calm before a tidal wave. I watched him pull away through the sheets of rain, headlights cutting arcs through the water. My flashlight beam trembled in my hand, and I blinked sweat and rain from my eyes. Camille wasn't waiting on the porch when I trudged back. The house stood silent, lights off, as though she'd retreated to safety. I climbed the steps, mud in my hair, and shook droplets from my jacket. Inside, the living room clock ticked loudly in the hush. I peeled off gloves and turned toward the kitchen, expecting her apology or relief or anger. Something to justify risking drowning for a man who'd betrayed me time and again. Instead, I found Camille leaning against the counter, arms crossed, eyes red but fierce. Thank you, she said. Voice cracked. Relief and guilt warred in her expression. He's going to kill me if he finds out I called you. My heart lurched at the idea, not for Camille, but for the quiet war I sensed unfolding beneath her words. I was in her world now, tangled with this man whose presence felt like a shadow I couldn't outrun. I swallowed the ache in my chest and forced a smile. Anyone would have helped, I lied. Later, I lay awake in bed, curtains billowing as wind slammed the windows. Rain drummed a lullaby of guilt in my ears. I kept replaying Russell's smirk when he thanked me, the way his eyes glinted when I stood soaking in his debt. Camille's whisper echoed in the dark. He's stranded, and you're the only one. But he wasn't stranded. He'd staged it. A setup beneath the storm's roar. My mind churned with possibilities as thunder rolled again. I should have left him in the rain. I should have let the storm do its work and stayed inside, safe in my life with Camille. Instead, I'd given him a lifeline, and now the vicious weather wasn't the only force that could drown me. When the city inspector slapped that bright orange sticker on our front door, the rain had long since stopped, but my blood still felt damp with fury. I came home late that afternoon, the sky gray and drifting with clouds, certain I'd find Camille pacing in our kitchen, espresso in hand, a look of worry already forming on her face. Instead, I discovered her standing on the porch, framed by the threshold, staring helplessly at the glinting sticker that declared my home a violation zone. Unauthorized repair business, it read in bold black letters. A photo of me kneeling beside Russell's car in the rain, flashlight between my teeth, tools scattered like promises on the wet pavement. Time-stamped. Proof. $1,900 fine. Camille's eyes met mine through the glass. She held up a trembling hand. I swear, Tyson, I didn't know, she mouthed. But I knew better than to believe in ignorance. She was too clever, too careful, too tangled in Russell's world even now. The moment I stepped inside, boots dripping mud on the welcome mat, she closed her eyes and bit her lip until I nearly tore my shirt trying to breathe. I helped my wife sex in a storm, I said, voice low enough that the walls might overhear. And now the city thinks I'm running a business without a license. I yanked the sticker from the doorframe, crumpling the flimsy paper in my fist as though it were Russell's smug grin. The rain of that night felt resurrected in the pounding of my pulse. Camille pressed a hand against her forehead. What am I supposed to do? She whispered. I didn't file it. He must have. I scoffed at the thought. Russell had every motive, every excuse to watch me drown in paperwork, citations, and fines until I begged for mercy. I paced in the living room, carpet damp from my boots, mind racing through the logs of encounters I'd shared with Russell since that night. He'd clapped me on the shoulder and called me buddy. He'd called me Tyson, like we were old friends. But he'd always been the kind of snake who strikes when you're looking the other way. The fine notice sat on the coffee table, its envelope torn open, demand letter inside. I slid it again, almost hoping to find some clerical error, a loophole that might shave off a 0 or 2. There was none. The city photographer had caught me red-handed, or at least red mud-handed, fixing a connector. The code, mechanical work without permit. And there I was, guilty as charged. I knew who to blame. I dialed Russell's number without hesitation. His voice answered after the first ring, bright, almost amused. Tyson, he said, what's up? He sounded like a man ordering coffee, not the architect of my financial misery. I didn't bother with pleasantries. You filed this complaint, I said. You set me up. His chuckle came easy, full of condescension. You brought it on yourself, buddy. Shouldn't play mechanic without a license. He paused, letting the words sink in like ice into water. Should have stayed in your lane. Then he hung up. The phone slipped from my hand, landing face down on the hardwood floor. I kicked at the planks until the rattle in my chest subsided. Camille appeared in the hallway, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold her heart in place. He wouldn't do that, she said. He's my ex. Her defiance wobbled under the weight of my stare. Hatred welled up in me for Russell, for Camille's blindness, even for the storm that had dragged me out into the fury of that night. I retrieved my laptop, logged into the city's permit portal, and drilled down on the photos. There I was under streetlights, rain streaming off my jacket, Russell's car hood raised. The inspector's metadata tagged me as the vehicle's repair technician. My shame seared hotter than any storm could. I closed the browser and stared out the window at our lawn, still slick from yesterday's downpour. Every droplet felt like a taunt. You thought you were helping. You thought you could trust. Camille's voice came again, quiet and brittle. I'm sorry. I turned to her, anger and heartbreak colliding in my gaze. Sorry doesn't pay this, I said, gesturing at the notice. It doesn't fix the stain on my record. She swallowed, tears rolling down her cheeks. What do you want me to do? She asked, voice cracking. I inhaled, knuckles white around the notice. Find out how he did it, I said. Give me the name of the person he used. We're going to fight this. She nodded, wiping her cheeks. I heard the tremor in her breath, the confession of fear beneath her compliance. Outside the window, the clouds parted, revealing a sliver of pale blue sky. For a moment the world held its breath, as though waiting to see if I'd sink under the debt or rise above it. I folded the letter, shoved it into my jacket pocket, and reached for my keys. Camille glanced at me, alarm flickering in her eyes. Where are you going? She whispered. Back to the garage, I said. There's more to learn. I slung my jacket over my shoulder and strode toward the door, determination stiff in my spine. The rain had given him life once. Now it would fuel my resolve. When the fine collectors came knocking, they'd find a man who refused to pay for the sins of another. And when Russell realized he'd gone too far, I'd be waiting, tools in hand, ready to tighten every bolt on his empire until it snapped. The lesson had cost me $1,900, but the price of revenge was far greater, and I intended to pay it in full. Camille had a way of whispering apologies like they were meant for someone else. After the fine, after the card with the inspector's name and Russell's smug grin, she stood in the doorway of our bedroom and said, "I just want peace." That was her new refrain. Not fairness, not truth. Peace. But peace for whom? Not for me, certainly. Not for the man with a violation pinned to his name and a marriage fraying like the baseboard in the laundry room, moldy, overlooked, and 1 inch from collapse. I didn't press her that night. I couldn't. My jaw was too tight, my hands too restless. I spent hours in the garage, reorganizing tools that didn't need organizing, shelves that didn't need adjusting. I traced the same steps in my head again and again. Rain. Russell. Engine. Clap on the shoulder. Fine. Card. Camille's nervous glance when Russell's name came up. The dots connected themselves, slowly, maddeningly. She still checked his Instagram. I'd seen it in the reflection of her phone screen when she thought I wasn't watching. She still answered his texts, or at least read them. Notifications would light up her screen, and she'd let them linger before flipping it over. "It's nothing," she said when I finally asked. "We have history." History. That word landed like a slap. What kind of history earns a man the right to drag me into court fees and city fines? And then, as if summoned by my thoughts, the next blow came, our mailbox stuffed with an HOA violation letter. Trash bins improperly stored. Improper fence height. Decorative lights on the wrong calendar schedule. Our home, which had passed inspection last season without a single blemish, now sat under siege. Each line item in that letter read like it was written by someone with binoculars and a vendetta. Camille read it in silence, chewing the corner of her lip. "I'm sure they're just cracking down across the neighborhood," she offered weakly. I folded the letter, pressed it onto the kitchen counter, and said nothing. But I knew. I knew Russell was behind it. I knew because this wasn't chaos. It was a campaign, one where every citation was a paper cut, each one small enough to ignore on its own, but collectively enough to make a man bleed. The next day, I took a walk through the neighborhood, just to breathe, just to clear my head. As I passed Russell's house, the white colonial at the end of the block with the freshly painted porch and the unearned pride, I saw him. Standing in his driveway, pretending to check mail, wearing that same smug calm like a designer jacket. I didn't cross the street. I walked slow, deliberate, and when he saw me, he gave me a little wave. "Tyson," he called. "How's the paperwork treating you?" His voice had that thin veneer of politeness that only made the venom more obvious. I stopped on the sidewalk. "You filing for the HOA now, too?" I asked. His smile widened. "Maybe they just don't like your fence." He leaned on it. My fence, the one the HOA had just flagged, like it belonged to him. "Or maybe," he said, "they don't like people who don't play by the rules." That was the moment I knew Camille couldn't be the mediator anymore. Whatever tether remained between her and Russell, it wasn't frayed, it was alive. It pulsed under everything she said. Her desire for peace wasn't about protecting me. It was about preserving the illusion that she could stand in two worlds without being consumed by either. That night, I confronted her. She was sitting on the edge of our bed, scrolling on her phone. "Why does he still have access to you?" I asked. She looked up, startled. "Russell, why is he still part of your day?" She set the phone down, sighed. "Because cutting him off makes things worse." "No," I said. "Cutting him off makes things clear." She was quiet. Then finally, "I owe him." "Owe him what?" "I don't know," she said. "Time. Closure. He helped me through things before you. He picked up pieces you didn't even know existed." Her voice was small, almost ashamed. "And now he's punishing me for that." I snapped. "No," she said. "He's punishing me. You're just in the crossfire." I sat down, stunned. My chest burned. So that was it. He wasn't just trying to break me. He was trying to get her to pick a side. And every time I fought back, it fed the guilt she still carried for choosing me over him. From that point on, our house turned cold. Not from temperature, but from silence. We passed each other like strangers. Her texts were shorter. My dinners were quieter. I moved into the guest room, not because she told me to, but because the bed we once shared felt like neutral ground in someone else's war. Still, I wasn't ready to surrender. If Russell wanted to bleed me dry with code violations and paper trails, I'd find his paper trail too. So I started watching. Not Camille. Him. I tracked when he left, when he came home, I noted the same gray van pulling up to his garage every Friday afternoon, unloading crates and cartons into his side yard. Sometimes men in work boots, guys who didn't wear uniforms or name badges, stepped out, passed off cash, and disappeared. Whatever he was doing, it wasn't above board. I bought a notebook. I logged every sighting, every tag number, every timestamp. This wasn't just personal anymore. This was a man building a tower of offenses while trying to bury me under rubble. But this time, I wasn't just going to wait for another storm. I was going to be it. And Camille? I didn't know where she stood anymore. But I had to believe that when the dust settled, she'd see it too. The mold growing in the walls of our marriage. Quiet, toxic, but undeniable. She wanted peace. I wanted truth. And sometimes the only way to peace is through fire. At first, watching Russell felt like a shameful habit, something you did late at night and swore you'd stop in the morning. I told myself I was only looking to confirm my suspicions. But the longer I observed him, the more my certainty hardened into something dangerous. This wasn't curiosity anymore. It was preparation, strategy, survival. Russell lived like a man who didn't think consequences applied to him. His front yard was flawless, manicured to the inch, not a single blade of grass out of place. But his backyard told a different story. Behind that tidy house, shadows moved. Every Thursday around 5:30 p.m., a gray cargo van would back into his alley gate. No company logo, no plates visible, always the same. Two men in scuffed boots unloading flat boxes and duct-taped crates behind his garage. They never rang a doorbell. They never stayed longer than 15 minutes. I took photos, dozens. I documented the timestamps, the faces, the boxes. And I waited. Not for the city, not for the HOA. I waited for Camille to say something, to show even the slightest flicker of alarm or curiosity. But she didn't. She started going to bed earlier. Always tired. Always fine. She said she was giving me space, but her silence carved more distance than any room could hold. Then she dropped the next bomb. "We're having him over for dinner," she said one evening as I stood at the sink, rinsing out a glass. I didn't answer immediately. I thought maybe I misheard her. I turned, slow. "Russell?" I asked, just to be sure. "Yes, just for one night. To smooth things over. I thought." She trailed off, biting her lip the way she always did when she knew she was stepping on a landmine and hoping I wouldn't notice. "You invited him into this house?" I asked, voice steady even as my grip on the glass tightened. "After everything?" Her eyes welled, but I saw no guilt in them. Just exhaustion. "Tyson, he's not going away. He's part of my past, and you're letting this obsession turn you into someone else." Someone else? That line again. As if noticing a slow, deliberate sabotage made me the problem. I showed her the photos. The van. The men. The deliveries. I waited for her to respond, to see the pieces lining up the same way I had. But she didn't look horrified. She looked annoyed. "You're spying on him now?" "I'm watching the man who got me fined and flagged, Camille," I snapped. "The man who's trying to bleed us through paper and policy while you're worried about hurting his feelings." She crossed her arms. "You want to win, Tyson. That's what this is about. It's not about justice or safety. It's about proving you're better than him." I didn't answer, because maybe part of that was true. But so what? The man had earned it. And now, apparently, he had an invitation to dinner and a warm seat at my table. When Russell arrived, he came bearing a bottle of red wine and a smile that made my skin itch. He complimented the paint on our shutters, joked about his old favorite chair still being in the same spot on the porch, and stepped into our home like he'd never left it. Camille smiled politely and welcomed him with a hug that lasted 2 seconds too long. I watched his eyes shift past her shoulder, right to me. "Tyson," he said, like we were old drinking buddies. "Thanks for letting me come by. I know we got off on the wrong foot." "That was a foot?" I asked, closing the door behind him. "Felt more like a knife." He laughed. Camille didn't. We ate roasted chicken and rice, and Russell talked the entire time. About his new job flipping appliance units. About the house 2 blocks over he almost bought. About how the city's been real picky lately, haven't they? He never looked at me when he said it. Just kept sipping my wine, eating my food, telling stories like the villain in a bedtime fable who thinks he's the hero. At one point, he turned to me and said, "You ought to get out of the house more, Tyson. Might take the edge off." Camille gave him a quick glance, sharp and warning. I didn't blink. I leaned forward, elbows on the table, and said, "I will. When I'm done dealing with snakes." He chuckled, slow. "Well, if you ever need a snake trap, I know a guy." Then he raised his glass to me, as if we shared a joke. When dinner ended, Camille walked him out. I watched through the blinds as they stood by his car. She nodded. He touched her elbow, just for a second. And when she came back inside, she didn't meet my eyes. I went in the garage that night. Sat in the dark. Just me, the hum of the beer fridge, and the ache of knowing something in my house had cracked and wouldn't seal shut again. It wasn't just Russell. It was the part of Camille that still left the door open for him. But I had more than pictures now. I had a pattern, a van, a schedule, a reason. So I said it out loud, not for her, or even for myself. Just for the truth. You wanted peace. He wanted control. But me? I whispered, as I reached for my notebook. I want the truth, and I'm going to bury him in it. When the paper cuts piled up like fallen leaves across our front yard, I knew I needed more than stubbornness and late-night stakeouts to win this war. Camille's guilt had cowered in the shadows, and Russell's brazen confidence had only grown with each new fine. I needed an ally, someone who moved in the gray spaces where law, wiring, and loopholes intertwined. That's how I found Holland Fisk, my high school friend turned local contractor and ordnance whisperer, the kind of guy who could read a municipal code like most men read comic books. I first texted him at sunrise, careful not to wake Camille. "Need your ear," I wrote. "Meet me garage side." He arrived 30 minutes later, boots scuffed, shirt untucked, his easy grin dimmed by concern when he saw the sticker still stuck to our doorframe. Inside the garage, I laid out the evidence. Photos of Russell's van unloading boxes, the HOA violation stamp, the fine notice, my notebook filled with dates and license plates. Holland's eyebrows arched as he flipped through the stack. He ran a hand through his hair, then grabbed a long screwdriver from the bench. "You've been busy," he said, voice low. I nodded, feeling the weight of every moment I'd spent watching my neighbor become my nemesis. "He's building something," I said, "but I don't know what. Illegal appliance flipping, I think. But that's small potatoes compared to what he did to us." Holland studied the violation sticker again, tapping it with the screwdriver's handle. "They took your house for photo evidence," he muttered. "Means someone in code enforcement took the bait." He looked up at me. I steady. "You want his empire crumbling? First, we need to build a case he can't bribe away." Holland's plan clicked into place like gears meshing. He knew city officials from years of digging permits and dodging red tape. "I can get you in front of Inspector Thorne," he said, pronouncing the name like a curse. "He doesn't take side money." Next, we compile my photos and testimony, plus whatever Camille could coax out of Russell's Instagram DMs, evidence he still reached out to her behind closed doors. Finally, Holland whispered the part that sent a thrill through me. We pull a full audit on his properties, business, and environmental. If he's hiding forbidden refrigerants or flipping appliances without safety checks, we drop that bomb at his feet. I clench my fists. This wasn't just about my fine anymore. It was about exposing a man who'd thrived on other people's misfortune. Over the next week, Holland and I worked in tandem. I handled surveillance, noting when the gray van arrived, how long the men stayed, what they unloaded. I cataloged timestamps, license numbers, evidence growing thicker than the rain that had once soaked me to the bone. Holland tapped concrete, traced pipes, and whispered to city clerks who owed him favors. When he filed for the audit under a shell company, he handed me the confirmation code with a grin. "Watch him sweat once he sees state-level agents knocking," he said. I scrawled the code in my notebook, an arsenal in ink. Camille watched our partnership from the sidelines, face pale when we told her what was coming. "This is overkill," she said one afternoon as we sat in the living room, the sunlight slanting through half-closed blinds. "He's just your ex's ex. Do you really want to drag him through the mud like this?" I saw the tremor in her voice, fear, I realized, not for Russell, but for the man I was becoming. I reached for her hand. "I'm doing this for us," I said. "For our home, our marriage. I can't live with fines and threats and HOAs digging in every week." She searched my eyes, as though measuring the distance between who I'd been and who I was now. After a beat, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's finish this." When the first inspection notice arrived at his door, I celebrated quietly. Holland slid me a text, health code violation, unregistered rental unit, $3,200. Next inspection Monday. I dropped my phone and looked at Camille, whose lips curved in a small, weary smile. We drank cold beer on the back porch that night, rain clouds gathering on the horizon for the first time in days. It felt right, a reckoning in the air. Then came the biggest blow. Holland called at dawn. I found it, he said. In his storage unit. Banned refrigerants, rusted compressors flagged for illegal disposal. Polluting ground soil. I forwarded everything to the Department of Environmental Protection. My stomach twisted as I pictured federal agents descending on Russell's operation. Camille stared at me, eyes wide with a mix of triumph and horror. We did it, I said softly, so as not to wake the neighbors. As the letters piled up at Russell's house, health codes, environmental citations, property liens, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Satisfaction. Justice, maybe. Or the closest thing my heart could muster. The man who'd smiled at me in the rain, who'd laughed when my name appeared on a violation sticker, was finally getting his comeuppance. That evening, as we sat together on our porch swing, Camille rested her head on my shoulder. We watched storm clouds roll in, thunder rumbling in the distance. Thank you, she whispered. I wrapped an arm around her and kissed the top of her head. We finish wars together, I said. Her breath hitched, and she nodded. In the dark, I thought about the wrench in my pocket, the notebook full of evidence, the quiet hum of the swing beneath us. The fixer had done his part. I'd done mine. Russell wouldn't leave us in peace just yet. He was too stubborn, too angry, but the tide had turned. He was bleeding out, each violation a cut he couldn't staunch. And I, the man who once patched his car in the rain, had become the architect of his downfall. The tools in my hand no longer just repaired engines, they ripped into lies. And for the first time in weeks, I slept without dreaming of orange stickers and looming court summons. I slept with the knowledge that sometimes, to protect what you love, you have to fight fire with fire, tool with tool, and finish what you start. The tension in our home became a living thing, one you could touch, taste, and feel pulsing in the walls. I'd grown used to bearing its weight like an armor, watching Russell's empire unravel and Camille's face grow pale with each new notice. But that night, as I climbed the stairs, I found her in the hallway, shoulders trembling, her marathon of composed silence finally unraveling. The lamp in the corner cast an amber glow on her as she perched on the edge of our bed, tracing the grain of the wooden frame with restless fingers. She looked up when I paused in the doorframe, eyes red-rimmed and haunted. "Tyson," she said, voice cracking. "I can't do this anymore." She was clutching her phone like a life raft. I recognized the trembling from the day she told me she owed Russell something she couldn't name. Now the debt had come due in sleepless nights and furtive glances. I closed the door softly behind me and sat beside her, the mattress dipping under my weight. "Talk to me," I urged. She shook her head. "It's Wyatt," she whispered. Russell's son, Wyatt Carr, had started circling our block in his beat-up Camaro as if he were surveying territory. Last week I found empty beer bottles and cigarette butts scattered across our lawn. Camille insisted it wasn't Russell's doing. She said boys would be boys, but I didn't believe her. Not anymore. Her phone buzzed with an anonymous text just then. She glanced at it, eyes narrowing. "Tell your husband to stand down," it read. No signature, no number. Just a threat dressed in black ink. Camille's hand flew to her mouth, muffling a sob. "He's escalating," she said between ragged breaths. "He wants me to tell you to back off." I held her hand, tracing her veins with my thumb. "You don't have to tell me anything," I said softly. "I can handle him." Her laugh was brittle. "Can you?" That question snapped something open inside her, and the dam holding back weeks of fear and guilt burst. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she leaned into me. "I'm sorry I dragged you into this," she sobbed, voice shaking like a leaf in a gale. "I thought I could stop him. I thought I could protect us by pretending he didn't matter." Her confession hit me with the force of a storm surge, washing over every inch of my skin. I pulled her into my arms, feeling her tremble against my chest. "You protected me," I whispered. "You just didn't realize how badly he wanted to hurt me through you." She pressed closer, tears soaking into my shirt. "I don't want to lose you," she choked out. "But I don't know how to keep him away from us." I stroked her hair, inhaling the faint scent of lavender and fear. Outside, the wind rattled the window panes as though testing our resolve. I thought of the stack of violation notices, the audit filings, the looming court dates awaiting Russell. I thought of the satisfaction I'd felt watching his world crumble, and I wondered if that made me the monster she feared. After a moment of silence, I sat up and brushed her hair from her face. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, voice firm. "But we do this together. No more secrets. No more wondering if you're torn in two. She sniffed, wiping her eyes on the sleeve of her sweater. Together, she agreed. I nodded and handed her my notebook. Show me everything, I said. All the texts, the photos, the threats. We'll map it out. Start fresh. Her hand shook as she opened the notebook and flipped to the back pages, where I'd sketched out license plates, then schedules, and notes on Russell's deliveries. Reading my scrawled entries, she gasped at some of the details. I didn't know you were watching so closely, she murmured. I was too afraid to look. I covered her hand with mine. That's okay, I said. We both have our ways of coping. But fear doesn't protect us. It only hides the truth until it's too late. She closed the notebook and looked at me with weary gratitude. What do we do now? She asked. I stood and offered her a hand. We fight back smarter, I said. Not with hate or obsession, but with evidence and patience. He wants to scare us. We'll show him we're unshakable. She took my hand and rose, her legs unsteady but determined. No more running, she repeated. No more hiding. I guided her to the window where the Camaro had scraped our sidewalk earlier that week. The street was empty now, save for the hush of the night. I closed the curtain and turned to her. We'll start by talking to Lori Garrison, I said. The compliance investigator who won't be bought. She'll open the next wave of inspections, building violations, zoning infractions, whatever it takes. Camille nodded, resolve hardening her features. And what about Wyatt? She asked. The boy who tortured our yard. I met her gaze. We document him, I said. Photos, times, dates. We compile everything. He's part of the pattern. She exhaled, as though the weight in her chest had shifted. Okay, she said. Let's do it. I pulled her close, resting my chin on her head. We'll do it together, I promised. Outside, the rain began to fall softly, a gentle patter that felt different from the storm that had started this fight. It sounded almost like promise, a cleansing, a new beginning. I kissed her forehead and whispered into her hair, I've got you. In the quiet that followed, I realized how close we'd come to breaking and how much stronger we would be for the cracks we'd faced. Camille's confession had been the lightning strike I needed to cut through the tension and reveal the solid ground beneath. We were tired, bruised, and wary, but we were united. And sometimes, the fiercest strength lies not in holding back tears but in letting them fall, washing away the fear so you can stand tall in its place. Together, we would rebuild our home, our marriage, and our lives, brick by brick, storm by storm, until Russell Carr and his venomous games were nothing more than memory. When the first knock on the door came, I was in the study, leaning over my desk and sorting through the latest batch of photos. Russell's unmarked gray van parked idly outside my house. Wyatt Carr's Camaro windows down as he surveyed our yard, and the crumpled anonymous text warning Camille to stand down. Across the table, Camille sat with Inspector Garrison's contact details, hugging them to her chest like a lifeline. The knock echoed through the halls. Light, almost polite. I exchanged a look with Camille and stood. I opened the door to Lori Garrison, clipboard in hand and determination in her eyes. She wore the crisp uniform of the Office of Municipal Oversight, insignia gleaming on her shoulder. Mr. Hale? She asked, glancing past me at Camille. I stepped aside and gestured inside. Please, come in. Camille offered Lori a small, grateful smile as she followed us into the living room. Lori set down her clipboard and studied the room, her gaze flicking to the front door where the old code violation sticker still tacked to the frame bore witness to Russell's handiwork. I've reviewed your file, Lori said, voice measured and precise. Your complaint alleges unlicensed mechanical repairs, HOA violations spurred by a vendetta, and evidence of hidden business operations at Mr. Carr's properties. Do you have additional documentation to support these claims? I handed her a thick folder bound with rubber bands. Inside were my surveillance logs, photographs, copies of every violation notice sent to both our home and Russell's properties, and the notes from Holland's environmental audit showing banned refrigerants and illegal dumping. Camille added a folder of her own, screenshots of DMs, a record of text from the anonymous number, and eyewitness accounts from neighbors who had seen the gray van arrive week after week. Lori flipped through the pages, nodding thoughtfully. This is thorough, she said. Well organized. Whoever's behind this has done their homework. My throat tightened. I'd worried I'd missed something, but here was proof I could stand on. Lori tapped a few items with her pen, then looked up. I'll launch a formal investigation. We'll schedule inspections at all locations, residential, commercial, auxiliary properties. We'll look at building code, environmental code, business licensing. If we find any infractions, citations and fines will follow. Camille exhaled as though a great weight had lifted from her chest. Thank you, she whispered. Lori looked at me. Mr. Hale, I'll need you to be available for interviews. And I recommend you continue documenting any further incidents, threats, damage to property, any form of retaliation. This office takes witness intimidation seriously. As Lori gathered her folders and headed to the door, Camille touched my arm. This is a turning point, she said softly. I nodded, steeling myself for what would come next. Once Lori left, the hush of our house felt profound, no longer a battleground marked by unseen weapons, but a war room where allies had taken our side. Over the next several days, inspections began like clockwork. The city building inspector arrived at Russell's main residence first, clipboard in hand, measuring tape and code book in a battered satchel. I watched from across the street, hood drawn low, as the inspector pored over permits and counted fence slats. The next morning, an official notice slapped to Russell's front gate outlined a dozen violations: unpermitted electrical wiring, improper drainage systems, and overheight fencing. Each item carried potential fines larger than the $1,900 he'd scoffed at when it was my turn. The gray van deliveries didn't stop, but now they found Lori's environmental agents waiting in the alley, clipboards and cameras at the ready. They traced discarded coolant drums to his storage unit and slapped another series of citations for hazardous waste disposal. Meanwhile, I continued my own watch, photographing each visit, noting the men's boot prints trailing through the mud, and pairing the shots with timestamps that mirrored his audit reports. I felt a grim satisfaction each time I slipped another image into my evidence binder, knowing it would bolster the case that made Russell's life a ledger of trouble. At home, Camille and I fell into a rhythm that felt foreign and yet profoundly familiar. She checked the front door for flyers or threats each morning, and I updated our log with any new developments before dawn. We shared coffee in the kitchen across two mismatched mugs, planning our next moves as though generals mapping strategy over battlefield maps. The silence between us no longer chafed, it hummed with purpose. One evening, after a particularly brutal downpour, I found Camille at the back door, drawing patterns in the condensation. She turned when I approached. I got a message, she said, voice tight. I reached for her phone. The text read, "Stop digging, or it gets worse." No signature, no number, just a threat. I pocketed the phone and looked into her eyes. They're rattled, I said. And so are we. Together, we drafted a letter to Lori's office, attaching the screenshot and requesting added security measures in case of retaliation. In the margin, I wrote a note to myself: document every threat. Show them we won't back down. Camille drew a shaky breath and nodded. The inspections continued, rolling from one property to the next. Russell's unlicensed appliance workshop, once hidden behind boarded windows, was discovered, and an injunction ordered him to cease operations immediately. His second property, listed as a rental, was deemed unsafe and vacated on the spot. The fine stacked higher than he could pay. When I saw him across the street one afternoon, red-faced and arguing with his attorney's assistant, I felt a fleeting sting of pity before it was replaced by relief. He pounded his fist on the hood of his car, frustration flaring like the propane torch of a metalworker gone mad. I turned back to Camille's side, where she stood with her arms wrapped around herself, watching from our porch. She caught my eye and let out a breath so long, it seemed to carry away the weight we'd carried for months. That night, as we closed the blinds and locked the doors against another gathering storm, Camille nestled against me on the couch. "We're winning," she said softly. I chuckled, pulling a blanket over us. "The quiet war," I murmured, "is the one that breaks them." In the hush of our living room, I realized I'd never felt more alive. The battle had shifted from idle threats and paper fines to a full-scale dismantling of his operations. We'd moved from defense to offense, pushing forward with evidence and resolve. And though the storm still raged outside, inside we'd found calm. Call it peace, if peace meant knowing we held the truth, and it was enough to win. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of ordinary Tuesday that lulls you into believing nothing will ever change. I'd left early for work, slipping into my coveralls and grabbing a breakfast sandwich on the run, my mind already ticking through the schedule of inspections and meetings. Camille was still in bed, resting at last, after weeks of sleepless worry. By midday, I'd wrapped up a site visit and was heading home when my phone buzzed with a photo from the driveway camera. My truck, tires punctured and slashed, metal rims sinking into asphalt like wounded birds. My heart stopped, the breakfast sandwich half-chewed in my throat. Pulling into the driveway, I found the truck's tires shredded beyond repair, glass shards scattered across the pavement like confetti thrown at a funeral. I crouched beside the front passenger wheel, running my fingers through the shredded rubber, the embedded nails like tiny betrayal stakes. Anger and adrenaline surged, hot and electric, flooding my veins. I imagined Russell's smirk, knowing, triumphant, though he'd never have touched my property himself. He'd outsourced the deed, sent a message, back off or bleed more. Camille emerged from the house, dressed for the afternoon but pale as porcelain. She saw the truck and gasped, hand covering her mouth. "They've gone too far," she whispered. I rose, stepping around the mess of shredded tires to wrap her in my arms. "Who?" I demanded, but she shook her head. "An anonymous number, Wyatt's phone, maybe." Her breath hitched. "I saw him around on his Camaro last night, watching." Rage coiled in my chest, protective and feral. "It's retaliation," I said, voice low. "They want me to stand down." I surveyed the damage again, torn between fury and resignation. Each puncture and tear was a challenge, a dare to respond. I'd warned Camille this could happen. I'd told her we were in his crosshairs now that we'd drawn blood under his empire. But seeing it firsthand felt different, more personal. Russell wasn't just a face on a violation notice anymore. He was a ghost in the night, a saboteur who'd aimed his rage at me through the innocent steel of my truck. I crouched beside Camille, lowering my voice. "Call the police," I said. "File a report." She pulled her phone from her pocket with shaking fingers and dialed 911. I walked around the truck, taking photos from every angle, the shredded treads, the glass, the nails. My camera roll filled with evidence I would present to officers, to insurance adjusters, to anyone who'd listen. Fury and justice mingled in my mind. This act of cowardice would only deepen his downfall. When the police arrived, their uniforms stiff and professional, I guided them through the scene, laying out the facts in calm, clipped sentences. Camille stood close, comforting yet terrified. An officer jotted notes, another took photos, and a third dusted for fingerprints, though I knew the odds of finding usable prints were slim. "Looks like a paid job," the senior officer said, eyebrows knitting. "This wasn't random vandalism." I nodded. "It's retaliation," I affirmed. "I believe it's connected to ongoing investigations into Russell Carr's properties." The officer's gaze flicked to me, assessing sincerity. "We'll log it as a felony," he said. "You'll get a case number." Once they left, sirens fading down the street, I knelt beside the truck again, running my hand over a sharp groove where the rim met the curb. "They want me to back off," I muttered. Camille knelt beside me, hand on my shoulder. "We won't," she said. Her resolve held steady, even as her eyes flickered with fear. "We fight smarter." I nodded and stood, eyes on the house. That evening, with spare tires mounted in the garage and the felled ones waiting by the curb for pickup, we sat at the kitchen table under the harsh glow of the overhead light. Camille spread out the next round of inspection reports on her side. I laid out the police report and copies of the photos on mine. It felt like a war room, each document a soldier in the battle for our home. She picked up her pen and underlined the word felony. I added a note, linked to car investigation. Outside, the wind picked up in anticipation of another storm, whipping dry leaves across the driveway. I thought of the first time I'd helped Russell in the rain, how naive I'd been to trust a man so skilled at planting traps. Now every cloud on that horizon felt charged with menace and possibility. I closed my eyes, breathing in the scent of old coffee and fear. I refused to be afraid. We spent the next days bolstering our defenses. I had Holland reinforce the garage locks and install motion sensor lights that would spot movement before the culprits could strike. Camille contacted neighbors, urging them to share any strange sightings, open gates, unfamiliar vans, whispers in the night. We widened our circle, the isolation of those early weeks giving way to solidarity. The townhouse community rallied behind us, reminding me that this wasn't just my fight anymore. Meanwhile, Lori Garrison's team accelerated their timeline. She called with updates. Environmental citations confirmed, building code violations upheld, new fines levied against Russell's properties. Each victory felt sweeter, though the taste was tinged with the bitterness of knowing how much we'd endured to get here. Now it seemed he was desperate, threatening our safety because his empire was collapsing. On a Friday afternoon, a letter arrived from my truck's repair shop. An envelope thick with invoices and a demand to pay for the new tires and rims out of pocket before the parts were ordered. The sender, Russell Carr's attorney. Their names glared at me from the letterhead like a challenge. I ripped it open and read aloud to Camille. Compensation for damages to Mr. Hale's property as a result of wear and tear on municipal roads. Every word dripped with gall. They tried to blame me. I tossed the letter on the counter. They're rewriting reality, I said. Camille shot me a look that mixed anger and disbelief. They think they can bully us out of this fight. I grabbed the phone and dialed Russell's attorney, letting it ring until a stiff voice answered. "This is Tyson Hale," I said, tone measured. "I believe you meant to send me an invoice for damages your client inflicted. I'll contest it in court." I hung up before the response came. Every threat they made, every attempt at intimidation, only fortified my resolve. That night, as the wind howled outside and rain finally began to drum on the roof, Camille and I sat on the couch, side by side. I wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into me, exhausted but determined. "They wanted to scare us," she said softly. "But we're still here." I kissed her temple and felt the truth of it. "They can't win if we don't let them," I replied. In the dim light, I thought back to the first chapter of this story, Me, under the rain, helping a man I didn't trust. The thunder then had been violent, relentless, and I'd seen only a broken-down car. Now I saw the storm behind his eyes, the violence he unleashed to protect his secrets. But the storm that raged outside and the storm he tried to conjure were nothing compared to the force Camille and I had become together. I closed my eyes and whispered into the dark, "I'll never stand down." And in the hush that followed, I heard her breathing next to me, steady and sure. The retaliation had come. Now it was our turn to strike, not with wrenches or fines, but with unbreakable resolve. The war had reached its climax, and I knew this storm would pass, leaving us stronger on the other side. When the letter arrived, I was in the garage, wiping oil from my hands and reviewing the before and after photos of Russell's main property now plastered with violation notices. The envelope bore no return address, only my name scrawled in an elegant script I recognized all too well. I set down the rag and slit the flap, pulling out a single sheet of stationery stamped with Russell Carr's crested logo. My heart thumped as I read the words he'd chosen, each one dripping with faux benevolence and thinly veiled threat. "Tyson," it began, "I propose a truce. Your campaign of harassment has cost both of us more than it's worth. For the sake of Camille's peace of mind, I urge you to cease this vendetta. I miss the days when our encounters were civil. I'm willing to discuss terms, nothing extravagant, just an agreement to leave past mistakes buried. Let me know your decision by Friday." I crumpled the letter in my fist, the paper crackling like firewood in my palm. Camille entered the garage then, fresh from work, wiping her raincoat on the doorframe. Her eyes darted to the discarded letter and back to me. "What is it?" she asked, voice tight. I unfolded the paper and handed it to her, watching as her jaw clenched at his oily attempt at peace. "A truce," she read aloud, tone incredulous. "He wants to negotiate?" "Negotiation isn't his style," I said. "It's surrender. He knows he's losing." The rain outside tapped out a staccato rhythm on the metal roof as if urging me on. Over the past month, working with Holland and Inspector Garrison, we'd orchestrated a systematic takedown of Russell's unlicensed businesses and code infractions. His properties were subject to 3 active injunctions, fines totaling over $25,000, and a pending environmental lawsuit. He was bleeding resources and credibility. Camille's eyes filled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. "I never wanted it to come to this," she said, voice cracking. She studied the gulf between the neat cursive on the page and the jagged scars he'd inflicted on our lives. "He's asking for peace, but he created this war." I nodded, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "We're almost there," I said. "Let him know the only terms are his full compliance with every citation and the official court summons we've filed." That afternoon, I drafted a response on official letterhead from the Municipal Oversight Office. One that made no mention of negotiation or compromise. I typed, "Mr. Carr, your violations have been confirmed. Court summons for environmental, business, and property infractions have been issued for September 12th at 9 a.m. Failure to appear will result in default judgments and additional penalties. No further correspondence will be entertained." I slid the letter into an envelope and sealed it with a quiet finality. The next morning, the court summons arrived at Russell's address. delivered by a process server who rang my doorbell to confirm. I stood on the porch as he handed over the papers, Russell's former crest pressed flat beneath the server's fingers. The man was immaculately dressed, tie knotted perfectly, hat tipped respectfully. "Serve him well," I said, instinctive gratitude softening my tone. The server offered a nod and left, his step echoing down the street. Inside, Camille and I sat at the kitchen table with warm mugs of tea. The knowledge that Russell now faced legal reckoning filled us with a cautious optimism. "He'll show up," I said, stirring the tea. "He can't bear the humiliation of losing in court." Camille exhaled, closing her eyes. "I hope you're right." As September 12th approached, the neighborhood buzzed with anticipation. Word spread that Carr's empire was disintegrating, that the man once untouchable was finally held accountable. On the morning of the hearing, I donned a suit, something I hadn't worn since my sister's wedding, and waited in the courtroom's marble lobby. Camille stood beside me in a simple dress, hands clasped tightly, her gaze steady on the oak doors behind which Russell would soon appear. When he entered, my breath caught. He strode in with that same careless confidence, tailored suit hugging his shoulders, a briefcase in hand. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt, memory flash of the first time I'd seen him in the rain, cursing under a broken hood. Now he looked smaller, tighter, his eyes scanning the gallery as if seeking escape routes he knew didn't exist. The judge called the case, Carr versus the city of Lindenbrook. Witnesses were sworn in, Inspectors Garrison and Thorne, Hall and Fizz for the environmental logs, me for the documentation of retaliation and fines. Each citation flashed on the courtroom screen. Illegal appliance sales, unauthorized mechanical repairs, environmental dumping, property code violations. I testified with calm conviction, photo evidence lined up like altar candles illuminating his misdeeds. When it was Russell's turn, his voice was measured as he addressed the bench. He admitted to oversights and misunderstandings, but pleaded for leniency, pointing to his years of community service and charitable donations. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair, listened without expression. She reviewed the evidence and, after a pause that felt like eternity, delivered the verdict. Full compliance required, fines upheld in their entirety, additional penalties for perjury if he failed to adhere, and criminal charges for the documented retaliation against me. A hush fell over the room. Russell's eyes widened, panic flickering in their depths. He glanced at Camille and me. Two figures seated side by side, resolute and victorious. His lawyer rose to request an appeal, but the judge shook her head. "Appeals court is at your disposal," she said, voice final. "But until then, you will comply." As the gavel fell, relief washed over me in a wave so powerful I felt tears sting my eyes. Camille reached for my hand beneath the table. I squeezed back, unable to speak at first. When the courtroom emptied, we walked together through the polished halls, past the echo of Russell's retreating steps. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in months. Streams of light danced across the courthouse steps, a promise of renewal. We paused at the top of the stairs, side by side. Camille looked up at the sky, her smile tentative but genuine. "It's over," she whispered. I drew her close, feeling the warmth of her against the chill of the marble beneath us. "It's finally over," I agreed. In that moment, I thought back to the man I'd been, hesitant, complacent, led by goodwill into the storm. Then I looked at the man I'd become, determined, unyielding, ready to finish what he started. I kissed Camille's forehead and held her as the light poured down around us, a benediction for the peace we'd earned. We'd given Russell a chance to choose civility, but he chose chaos. In the end, he learned the hard way that I don't start wars, but I always finish them. When the final notice arrived, I was in the kitchen, sipping black coffee and scanning the morning paper, half expecting another violation slapped onto Russell's properties. Instead, it was a terse email from the county clerk. "Mr. Carr has failed to comply with all citations. Writ of possession granted. Property liens active. Case closed." I reread the lines twice, disbelief mingling with relief. He was gone, just like that. No sale listing, no forwarding address, no farewell letter. He vanished under the weight of his own misdeeds and the relentless storm we'd unleashed. Camille joined me at the table, eyes bright with something between triumph and exhaustion. "He left last night," she said, voice soft. "His locks were changed. The movers came before dawn." I glanced out the window at the gray sky, hesitant raindrops beginning to fall, as though the clouds mourned his departure. He boarded a bus out of state, she continued. No idea where. No trace. The simplicity of that sentence echoed. A man who once boasted power and connections reduced to a name on a long-distance manifest. We sat in silence, coffee growing cold, as the first claps of thunder rolled overhead. Memories flooded back, Russell's smirk in the rain, the fine notice on our door, the kitchen dinners where he invaded our home like a specter. Each snapshot felt distilled now, as though part of someone else's story. The rain tapped against the window panes, a gentle rhythm, no longer an accompaniment to chaos but a cleansing drumbeat heralding new beginnings. I never thought I'd see the day, Camille whispered, leaning across the table to take my hand. Her skin was warm despite the chill in the air. We did it. I squeezed her fingers, feeling the promise in her touch. We did. The words settled between us, uncomplicated and whole. Outside, the storm gathered strength, sheets of rain dancing across the lawn where tire tracks and footprints once told tales of fear and defiance. Now the grass glistened in the gray light, ready to wash away the traces of conflict. I stood and moved to the window, watching water sluice down the panes, imagining it carrying away every unhappy memory, every fine, every threat. Camille joined me, shoulder to shoulder, as we gazed into the watery blur beyond the glass. I bought flowers, she said unexpectedly, breaking the hush. She pointed to a simple vase on the windowsill, a bouquet of white lilies, their petals fresh and untainted by splashes of mud or rain. For us. I smiled, a slow warmth unfurling in my chest. Perfect. We left the lilies by the front door and stepped outside, boots crunching gravel, umbrellas overhead. The rain was a curtain between us and the world that had tested us. I reached for Camille's hand, and she closed her fingers over mine, her palm an anchor. We walked to our truck, repaired and ready, and I paused at the driver's door, eyes on the empty street. No gray van, no Camaro, only the hum of rain and the promise of peace. When I started the engine, the rumble felt different, a gentle purr, free of tension and threat. Camille slid into the passenger seat, breathless with anticipation. Where to? I asked, voice playful for the first time in months. She smiled, eyes glinting. Anywhere, she said. Somewhere dry. I shifted into gear and pulled onto the road, rain splattering against the windshield as we drove away. The house receded in the rearview mirror, its windows dark and unthreatening. My grip on the wheel loosened, and I exhaled, letting the tension bleed out. I thought of the wrench I'd given Russell in the rain, the fines, the audits, the court summonses, and realized that every battle had led to this moment. Driving into a future unburdened by past storms. As we rounded the corner, the rain lightened, and a shaft of pale sun broke through the clouds. A rainbow arced above the rooftops, brilliant and simple. Camille gasped softly. I glanced at her, and she reached over, resting her head on my shoulder. After all this, she murmured, we're together. We are, I agreed. My heart felt full, the weight of every violation and threat replaced by something lighter, hope. The rainbow faded as we drove on, but its promise remained. Storms pass, scars heal, and in the quiet after the rain, we find ourselves standing stronger, hand in hand, ready for whatever tomorrow brings.